Welcome to the Eating at a Meeting podcast. I'm your host, Tracy Stuckrath, dietary needs expert, certified meetings manager, certified food protection manager. I have searched the globe to find people and businesses who are creating safe, sustainable, and inclusive food and beverage experiences for their employees, guests, and communities. In each episode, you will find authentic conversations about how food and beverage impacts inclusion, sustainability, culture, community, health, and wellness. I know that sounds like a lot, but we're going to cover it all. Are you ready to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line? If so, let's go. Hi, welcome to the Eating at a Meeting podcast with me, Tracy Stuckrath, founder of Thrive Meetings and Events. In today's episode, I chat with Tinia Pina, founder of Re-nuble, a New York City-based company that enables farms to transform food waste into plant-based fertilizer for soilless cultivation. While volunteering for an SAT program in Harlem back in 2012, she noticed that the main food options available to the students were processed and fried. She thought they weren't feeding themselves nutritiously to stay alert and have the best chance to be productive in their studies. She had an idea from that and saw an opportunity to use a waste stream as a way to catalyze a more sustainable growing option near the urban areas these students lived. Listen to our conversation now. When did you start again, the company?
Yeah, so the company was first ideated in 2012, and then we really didn't actually start launching efforts until 2015. So a significant amount of time was invested in the R&D of what has always been our core competency of taking food waste and making it compatible as a fertilizer for soilless farms.
Okay, for soilless farms.
Correct. Yep.
Okay, so explain that.
Yeah. So, compost, and whether it's in compost heap liquid form or in your traditional compost heaps, adding that to a soil environment or traditional field agriculture is nothing new. And it's been, improved on for years. Where we felt there was a gap in the market are those that grow in controlled environments, such as indoor farms, greenhouses. And now you've seen this surge in this emerging market of vertical farms. Their interest in wanting to grow organically. And there's a couple limitations or quite a few limitations that prevent them to be able to do so, but doing so in a way that can make them as cost competitive with what they currently use. And those are mineral salts. So think of Epsom salts, like when you use in a sauna or a bath. They use Epsom salts that are similar in different types of nutrient forms. And that's the main plant food that they feed throughout their greenhouse. So we wanted to supplement that with food waste that's been ultimately turned into pellets. So that's part of our technology. And let that be the true organic source. But the difference is that there's a huge amount of precision and the need for control with how the nutrients are managed in these types of farms. Whereas in a soil farm, it's a lot more forgiving. You can put compost tea, you can use manure, and the soil will absorb it, and you have more time to adjust for things. But it does take longer to grow in a soil environment. Whereas with soilless, there's a lot more need for precision, and because of that, it's more resource efficient.
That's amazing. So did you go to school for science?
No. I went to school for IT, and I did go to a big ag school. So I went to Virginia Tech, but I have no, someone looking at my background would think that I have no business in agriculture. This really just stemmed from a personal passion of, okay, I see where things are going. And this was me back in 2012. More populations are inhabiting urban areas. Therefore, the waste volume is going to only increase. How can we make our food systems more resilient while growing in this way of, a way that's going to be more resilient to what may come, erratic weather patterns, lack of arable land, the need for water efficiency and water management. And I've been lucky to be in a position where it's kind of hit on all those things in terms of concerns for our future.
That's fantastic. Now, the vertical markets, so you're in New York. Are you working with Javits Center? Javits Center? I know they were doing some stuff on the top, on the roof of the convention center, right?
So that's interesting. I do know a contact there. I didn't know they're doing rooftop. I know they're big in terms of they were looking at trying to take food waste and basically process it on site. Because New York City is definitely trying to remove the number of haulers and trying to, increase food waste diversion. But no, we aren't. We this year is big for us in the sense that we're working with a lot of New York State farms. Here in the city, you may have heard of Farm One, Gotham Greens. There's a couple other smaller farms. We tend to go a little bit more out in terms of the greenhouse farms for right now, just because the cost of producing in more rural areas is a lot less than in the city. So we have relationships here. We just haven't done it quite yet.
Gotcha. Okay. And being in the meetings industry, and I know MGM in Las Vegas is trying to do the vertical farming. And there was another woman, I want to say she was in Georgia, or no, where was I? It was in South Carolina. She actually has some vertical farm stuff that she's doing in the big container tanks or big containers that go on the boats, right? Yeah. Container farming. And so it's just interesting, all of that and putting it in the school systems. And I love the fact that using it as a educational tool for the students as well. How things grow and getting them involved in all of that. I think that's a really cool option.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
One of the questions is, what inspired and instigated you to do this? Where were you in your career? What were you doing then? And that you saw this?
Yeah, absolutely. So in 2012, I was working in finance, working in investment management. And on the weekends, I was a prep SAT teacher through New York Cares, which is a pretty, all 5 boroughs, citywide volunteer program. And the high school that I was teaching at was Thurgood Marshall in Harlem. So we would start our classes at 8 a.m. on Saturdays, and it would go until 3 p.m. And just kind of seeing what the options and food choices some of the kids were bringing for lunch, a lot of them heavily processed and just kind of fried food. I just saw the impact of their attention levels immediately after lunch, right? So it concerned me because it's like, I could do my best to try to give them all the resources to really position themselves to do well for this test. But at the end of the day, if they're not feeding themselves the nutrition needed to kind of stay alert and have the best chance to be productive, then they're systemically at a disadvantage. And it all comes down to nutrition. So having that direct kind of experience while also just being really passionate and volunteering with some of the urban farms here and just seeing some of these trends, right, that I alluded to before, it's like I felt that this was a unique opportunity to use a waste stream as a way to catalyze more sustainable growing near these urban areas. And now we're kind of at this really interesting juncture where, you see more of these highly densely populated metropolitan areas kind of pushing for that local, whether you brand it as local, sustainable, or natural, but really evaluating the source and how it was grown. And questioning, why are there so many food miles being trucked from California when we have the means and the land and the resources to do it nearby? So I think, fortunately during this pandemic, it has forced a lot of us to rethink things and try to almost retrain ourselves and reprogram ourselves to have more control and more transparency of our how we eat and the food that we choose to eat. And so it's funny. I was talking to a lot of other people in this industry, and the sales of just organic produce and just produce in general has skyrocketed, which is why you've had the food shortages in some retail markets because of hoarding and just people wanting to have more control of what they're eating. But also seeds for both commercial growing and those that are growing consumers in their own residences, and the sales on top of that, which are urban plants, right? Buying those plants from online, people want to, it seems like, kind of go back to their roots and really be connected to just more natural or plant sources, even if it's not productive into a food source. I think that connection has been the want or desire for the connection has been higher than I've ever seen in my 36 years of living here. So I think we're at a really interesting precipice that I'm personally lucky to say that this, we've hit on something that was maybe too early in terms of what we were doing probably 10 years ago, but right now it's right on the dot. And I wouldn't say it's a trend. It is a shift that we are just globally experiencing in terms of wanting to have more interest in our food.
And I totally agree with that. And I was on a webinar a little while ago with a group, and it was luxury suite directors and, food service people who provide in those luxury suites for sporting events and stuff like that. And, most of the food that you get in those are not organic or not real healthy. And I'm like, you're going to be seeing your guests that are coming into these suites wanting to know where their food comes from, wanting to know what ingredients are in it. And you need to train your staff, and you need to know what you're doing, and you need to source locally. One guy said, I think we're going to have to go to packaged food. I'm like, I'm really, you need to read the labels of that packaged food. I didn't want to say, they're all allowed to lie except for the little nutrition box, right? That's the only spot they have to be truthful. So looking at what the nutrients are of that prepackaged food that you're going to serve and make sure that it is, but and especially with what's going on right now, with the farmers dumping the milk and the farmers also dumping their vegetables back into the ground. Sonny Perdue gets up and says, yeah, we have plenty of food in our system. I'm like, okay, but then you hear these farmers dumping because they have no way to get it to anybody. There's a disconnect, Secretary of Department of Agriculture. So how do you follow Robin O'Brien?
On LinkedIn. Yes.
Oh my God. I'm just
her.
Yes. And she's right. Because there is a disconnect with distribution. And I want to figure that out.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I think there's I know a guy that has a nonprofit in New Jersey called Move Food Hunger. And his technology, which I think is app-based, but they leverage the logistics of moving companies and their trucks to be more responsive to available food that could be directed to food banks. So to your point, it's the efficiency, and I'll get you the company name. Okay. I'm probably messing up the name right now. It's that type of thinking or that type of platform where it's like, okay, it's connecting the food producers in a very responsive way to show that there's available supply and how to get as quickly and efficiently and ideally at no cost to those that can offtake it. So it's almost like a waste management, routing density, someone that's great with logistics. Yeah, it is a challenge. And I think to your point earlier, we've been advocating for this. Produce is such a commodity, right? And produce distributors as well as our farmers are competing on very tight margins. But I think they really need to think about how they're differentiating their brand. And if they prioritize nutrition and the nutrition density of their food, then that's going to get consumers to be more latching onto their brand. Because I truly think that people are trying to be more in control of holistically healing, if you want to term it that way, but buying with, just holistic practices in mind rather than just eating to consume.
Right. One of the guys on that panel said, I think, but we'll have to go back and rely on the Cisco's and the U.S. Foods because they're going to be from USDA certified food vendors. And I'm like, and these other small farmers, they can't certify. And I'm like, well, because they can't afford that certification, but their food doesn't mean their food is not nutritious and dense in, what was that? The nutrition dense, right?
Yeah.
And you can't discount them for that and then go rely on those big food because they're one of the problems. And I didn't want to, say that on the podcast, but
I agree.
Yeah. I mean, and so reducing, and I had somebody put on LinkedIn or Instagram, showing the different levels of distribution. And then the best one is farmer to your plate. And how do we encourage people. My friends in Alabama, their CSA program has like quadrupled.
Wow.
Will said, I think I need to check out the chairs in my van and sit on the boxes so I can get more boxes in the van to deliver them.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because I haven't been following this too closely, but like, I don't know, some of the farmers markets here in the cities have either closed down or been reduced, but it seems like in other areas where, less quarantine, that's not the case.
Right. Well, and they're in Alabama and they drive 2 hours to Atlanta to deliver the boxes, and their CSA is, and their Saturday farmers market is still being held, but with them, you can pre-order your box, what you want, and you can just drive by and pick it up. So it's not the social distancing aspect is being brought into it, but, and I do like their CSA program because it is not a surprise box. It is pick what you want to put in it.
I like that. Yeah.
In what ways are you using the power of food to empower the communities and connect others? And kind of goes back to when you were doing the SATs, how are you still connected to those Harlem schools with what you're doing?
Yeah. So what we do here in the city, where we manufacturers in Rochester. So we have connections between both systems, downstate and upstate, as they call it here. In the city, we do a lot of I would say events and just speaking into classes to try to get students both in high school, middle school, as well as college familiar with this industry so that they see an opportunity, whether you want to call it as agriculture technology or food tech or just your traditional farming, to feel more connected to it, because there are inefficiencies, whether it's on the food supply side, the transparency of the supply chain, or just being able to grow more efficiently, given the weather patterns that are creating more pest and disease suppression challenges. We try to create as much kind of democratized education and spreading our wisdom so that we can get more people interested in these fields much sooner. It is the great thing about this area, the New York City metropolitan areas. We have some of these big companies that are venture backed in terms of funding. So Plenty, Aero Farms. There's another one I'm failing to mention. So there's a pipeline. And with that pipeline, I say we as in Re-nuble, but we're part of the New York City Agriculture Collective, which is a consortium of some of the farms that I mentioned, as well as practitioners in the industry, to try to groom and create education and share resources and opportunities to get more people filling in some of these roles that these companies have in terms of openings.
That's interesting. Like my nephew is studying management information systems, which is data. And he's a big movie guy, so I would love him to do it into the movies industry side of it. But, because they're just starting to use big data. But, I think this other side too, with agriculture and understanding that big data behind it, I think that's going to be something that students need to understand. And my niece is, studying geology and environmental sciences. And so, this could be something that she could jump into. And I think students need to understand what those opportunities are.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, unfortunately, I think the traditional courses in school they're dated. And so this industry moves so fast that it's like you really have to come in early, try to understand what the challenges are. And we do try to create opportunities where, students or people can hack on certain challenges that we see and we know that the industry is challenged by. And those are kind of great early entryways for people to develop relationships and really see if they want to pursue it.
That's awesome. So, just kind of going in that same direction, what's been your greatest obstacle in building Re-nuble and getting people to understand the importance of taking the food waste and doing something else with it?
Yeah, I would say it's technical. And then I would also say kind of just like a startup related thing. So on the technical side, without getting too sciencey about it, organics tends to work differently than when you're using your traditional synthetic fertilizer. Say if you're taking manure or chicken litter that's been granulated or pelletized, if you put it in the soil, it's going to act in a slow release way, meaning the nutrients are being available to the plant much longer time frame than if you were to take mineral salts like Epsom salt, put it in soil, add some water to dissolve it, and then boom, immediately the nutrients are available to the plant. The problem with that is as we all know, because there's too many nutrients in the soil, it oftentimes depletes it. And so long term, you are ruining your soil. It doesn't have the healthy soil structure that we used to years have ago or a long time ago have. And that additional runoff of the nutrients leads to longer systemic issues in our water streams. So that's on the one side of it. And that's just like the agronomy challenge, is getting the organics to perform in a similar or comparable way to what farms have been traditionally used to growing with, which are synthetic fertilizers. And that's just a new way. It's like an educational curve of growing what we call as organic cycling science. On the second side, just owning a company in agriculture, everyone's super excited about food and I would say agriculture at large. But with anything new and growing plants, creating technologies that are used to grow plants, it takes that much longer for validation. And so we've been bootstrapping this for quite a long time, because it's like we were in R&D for roughly 5 years. And then, R&D requires sometimes you don't see validation until like 45 days. And that's in a soilless farm. Imagine if it were soil, sometimes you need a year to show proof. So you really have to have a lot of patience. And I think people that pursue agriculture, I would strongly consider, really kind of doing it on the side until like you are 100% sure that you have market fit, and making sure that there's demand for your product, rather than trying to create demand where you'll realize too far down the line that it just wasn't as high as you may have thought.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like I started my business to educate people on food allergies 10 years ago, and they're like, "What? I have to do what? Why?" And I still have to do that, Yeah. I'm like, you don't want to kill anybody, but that's not the only reason, right? So, and as I don't want to say that word now, anyways, there's too many, people passing away from COVID-19.
True.
So with all of that, you've got your obstacles, but what's your greatest joy that you've had with this?
I think naturally, I know some people that have started companies and they have a really hard time trying to find good people to work with. And I think because of what we stood for, and really what I try to keep consistent within our brand, is that, we just want to do what's right for everyone, right? Like, I'm not in this business to make a whole bunch of money. I'm just in this business to get people to think and do differently for the benefit of the environment, for the benefit of people, and nourishing ourselves. Because I come from the adage that like, we have the ability to heal ourselves. We're just not aware of the tools. And so nutrition is one, there's other modalities. And so I believe and try to encourage the same thought with plants as well. There's no need for us to add a whole bunch of inputs and all these things that, plants, once they're biologically balanced, they'll have the right mechanisms to thwart off pests and insects. So I say this all on a tangent, but given that type of approach and that type of like way that I practice, it hasn't been hard to find really good people to work with. And I think the big takeaway is if people know that you're authentic and you come from good intentions and you're consistent about it, you're not just trying to do things to attract a certain outcome, you can find good people. You just have to stay steadfast to what your values are and don't let them become compromised.
That's awesome. I mean, and I think that's more true in a lot of things that we're doing these days, because people want the transparency in what we're doing, and not only just in our food system, but in just the way we do business. And it's hard sometimes because there is that systematic not being transparent about how we do business, and we need to change. We still need to work to change that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say, I follow Mark Cuban, and Mark Cuban's been becoming more vocal with everything going on. And he was just like, the businesses of tomorrow have to realize that they need to lead with compassionate leadership. And I was like, that's exactly right.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and we were talking about it on that panel, all these, stadiums, are they going to get the staff coming back? I'm like, you need to make sure that those frontline, because these are frontline workers, make sure that they understand the value that they have in your company, because they are the front facing people to your guests. And they add so much more value to them. And my niece is working at Target, and they're like, we're giving you $2 more an hour because you're out here doing this. And she's like, I love how Target's treating us as employees. And she just started working there 2.5 weeks ago. So
that's good.
Yeah. What advice would you give to a young woman aspiring or who are just starting out in the food and beverage ag world? Because, there's a lot more play on women farmers, which I think is awesome. But you're coming at it from a different angle a little bit too. But what advice would you give young women?
Yeah, I think being in this community, a lot of people are incredibly, it's like family, very close. They definitely will try to help you in ways that they can. And I've really appreciated that because it's not as transactional as dealing with some other people in different industries. So that type of attitude and being open and just talking about what you're trying to do, I think some women, and I am challenged by this sometimes, wait until everything's perfect before they talk about it. But the more you can talk about it, the more you can develop your brand early. And what I've been trying to tell people is that, the reason why you can benefit from developing your brand early is because you can work on your business idea for years. And as long as you kind of allow yourself to be known, you can make relationships with potential buyers and customers, et cetera. And you're that much more ahead when you're ready to fully commit full time to it.
There's a question that was asked of you in another interview, and not just your greatest joy and your obstacle, but what's the biggest opportunity you see with what you do with our food system?
So it's interesting. There's been a lot of, this was like maybe 6 months ago, talking about personalized nutrition. And then when you add that to, I really seeing farming being tailored based on the consumer's nutritional needs, if we can push the needle further on innovation to drive nutrition without genetically modifying it, without having to add synthetic inputs in any way, but really thinking about what are the biological drivers to get the most out of the plant to, let's say get higher amounts of magnesium for those consumers that are magnesium deficient, or diabetic patients that have an AC1 level, but if they consume a specific type of, let's say fruit, for example, then it's able to reduce their dependence on insulin. That's how I've been thinking. People need to think about what can they grow or perhaps provide as a unadulterated food product that can meet this type of, let's say, health care need. Because I think people would be very interested in it. I think the only challenge with that is, as a society, especially as Americans, I feel that we've been so dependent on what our doctor tells us, and there needs to be more rhetoric or more dialogue to get the trust needed for these consumers to think differently and not be so dependent on a prescription. So that's the challenge that works there.
Yeah.
So on the last question, it's Danielle Nurenberg with the Food Tank. Mm-hmm. She's incredibly authentic. I really appreciate her using her voice as a platform, and really is egalitarian in terms of representing the small farmer as well as, the interests of the entire kind of farming community, because it is very disparate. And I really appreciate her highlighting everyone's efforts, right? Farmers in South Bronx aren't giving nearly as much publicity, let's say, as the urban farmers in Brooklyn, or, and that's it's unfortunate, because unfortunately the way things work with media especially is the more impressions you have, the more attractive you are. And let's look at how that attractiveness turns into outcomes. It's easier to fundraise for grants, right? So it all is very relevant to each other. The other thing is, so me personally, it's always been, my mom has been an incredible worker. Her work ethic is insane and good in terms of like being incredibly perseverant, very focused. And my grandfather being an engineer, I think I take his ability to just really quiet things down and really analyze things in a way that I think has allowed me to just, because I've been in this for a while, so it's allowed me to really just stay consistent and very thorough about it.
Who is your buyer? Who buys your engineering, your products?
Yeah, so we basically sell to small, medium, and large or industrial scale soilless farms. And soilless can be vertical, it can be greenhouse, any indoor farm. And those farmers that grow specialty crops such as leafy greens, tomatoes, berries, hops even, in a year-round controlled environment.
Okay. And then where are you getting most of your food waste from?
Yep. So our facility that's located in Rochester, we source it from food processors / distributors. So think of, in this case, like we have a customer, Farm Fresh First, that basically takes produce waste that would normally go to a farm, and the value of us working with them is that, okay, not only are we turning to a resource value, and in some cases, we're just providing more like reliability, more consistent service. So not that farms shouldn't get it, but sometimes farms aren't the most reliable from what we've seen. And being able to just take this challenge for a food processor that's creating food waste, and we take the waste that is the residual. So think of like, let's say leafy greens that are pretty much spoiled and it's on its very last day or last few days. We take that residual, or potato peelings. So the processed byproduct, and that's what we pelletize.
Okay. And like working with the Javits Center to take their waste, or, hotels and things like that, because the hotels, the World Wildlife Fund is really working hard to get into the hospitality, working with the hotels and the convention centers, because we produce a lot of food waste in those facilities. Is that an option or going forward, or is it
possibly
fractionated like the farmers?
Yeah, possibly going forward. So we've had to only use pre-consumer waste because it gave us control so that we don't introduce any variables that would be downstream into the farms. Okay. But in the future, maybe there is. It's just right now we got to stay really focused on the pre-consumer food waste right now.
Looking back, what would you have done differently? What would you do again?
That's a good question. What I would have done differently is I would have tried to. So I've always been involved on the science of it, and from Matt Farrell, who's our plant scientist. He's always taking control of the grow trials for the product, and while we were in product development, I wish I would have picked that up sooner, and that would have given me more control of just really seeing how the production environment for these farms works and how our product could be a little bit easier for them to understand how it works sooner. I have that skill set now, but I wish I would have adopted that much sooner, because it would have brought the learning curve much sooner in the game.
How do you want to be remembered in history?
I would like to be remembered for, I think, trying to open up agriculture beyond our typical, demographics. So those in agriculture are usually, mostly Caucasian males between the age of 40 and 65. And there is a surgence of, sometimes these gentlemen's sons or their families starting to get into it. But there is this a little bit of a gap or hesitation for younger farmers to get into farming because of the infrastructure costs and because of the time, and not really seeing a higher return sooner, especially when you have student debt on your back. Mm-hmm. And so I would hope that I'm remembered for not only trying to do the right thing with food waste and not make it so much of an opportunistic, but rather it's coming from good intentions from a holistic perspective, and trying to introduce that in a field that is pretty, what would you say? It could be opened up to more people that are more diverse in terms of being involved in it. The easiest example or way that we explain it is you're still taking the seed, you're still growing it in a medium or substrate soil is that substrate, but when you grow it indoors, it's typically in rock wool cubes, for example, and you're still growing it using the same kind of nutrient approaches and best practices, temperature, water, what you're feeding to the plant, all of that remains the same. You're just more efficient with how much water you have to feed that plant. You're more efficient because you're able to produce 20% more produce per square foot than you would in a similar or comparable piece of area in an acre of farm. So it's just thinking about how can you do more with less, and do it in a year-round way that you're preventing a lot of the challenges related to pests and diseases.
Okay. No, that's awesome. Because I mean, there's a lot of people who probably think, oh my God, you're growing it's not coming from the ground. And what do you do? Yeah.
And I get that. I totally get that. It's also less tangible, right? Because it's behind a structure. I get that. Pictures help.
So what could me and Sue and just a normal everyday person do to make a bigger impact on the agriculture system and reducing food waste?
What I always try to tell people is that when retail markets or supermarkets do forecasting for how much produce they should purchase, they're going based off of historical trends of purchase behaviors in the past. So try not to over purchase. Be really intentional with how much food you need to buy for the week. And I know most often, especially outside of the city, people buy in larger volumes because they have the storage space and it's more economical. But just be really scrutinize how much food are you really buying, because purchase behaviors is truly driven off of historical data. And if we're being more precise with how much food we need, then we can be a little bit more efficient on the food waste that's being generated. I wonder if we could reopen our markets, right, due to the COVID thing, if we were more able to open our markets, if we had a comfort that across the board, communities were increasing their immunity through food. So imagine if all that wasted produce on the field because they couldn't find a market to sell it to, if instead we were like, you know what, we're going to create this concoction that's really great for increasing your immunity in these ways. High amounts of garlic, high amounts of vitamin C sourced from onions, all of this. But we're not, our healthcare is reactive. We're trying to feed something that we've been already diagnosed with. This is a great time for us to re-educate ourselves that we should use food as a preventative. I don't get it.
Yeah, there was something on the news last week, and I'm like, our system our healthcare system is reactive. I mean, we don't need all the drugs if we figure out how to take care of ourselves better. And I think one of the problems in, parts of New York and even in Georgia, where I used to live I'm in rural North Carolina here, is people don't know how to make food. So you send them to a farmer's market, and even with the SNAP program where you get $2 for every one when you go to the farmer's market, at least in Atlanta you did. The problem is, they don't know how to go home and make the food, and so, because they're used to buying McDonald's or they're used to eating Kraft macaroni and cheese where you just put everything together and voila, you've got food. But it does take effort, and it does take equipment too.
Mm-hmm. Isn't that a great idea though? If someone were to take all this extra produce, figure out a COVID, immunity meal, and sell that direct.
Yeah. Well, is there anything that you want people to know about what you're doing, and what it means to the food and beverage industry, to the agriculture industry that, they might not get?
That's a good question too. You've had a lot of good questions. We are very much interested in substituting with plant-based alternatives the need for anything synthetic in agriculture. Right now, that's fertilizer, right? And we want to push the needle on trying to make food more nutrient dense. So if we can get more of our retailers, if we can get more of our restaurateurs and anyone making food to think about how much more can we make this bring value to the consumer, I would love them to think more about nutrition. And I know nutrition, there's sensitivities to how you market it. and what can be marketed of nutrition. But I would love for us all to collectively push that, challenge ourselves more to drive that, instead of just the next trend of plant-based or gluten-free. And ideally less processed, but I know that's not possible in all respects.
If you could have anyone in the world over for dinner, who would you invite and why?
You know what? I think it would be Obama, President Obama. The reason why, I'm not a politics person. I would very much rather drive change through business, because there's more of a driver. You have a little bit more of the impact and urgency, because unfortunately money rules the world right now, or has been. But so I feel like it's easier to create the mechanisms to create change when you're doing it in a for-profit way. But I would love to just understand how hard it is to just get things done. And I can empathize anyone that is serving the public, because we have no idea, all the stuff that, all the bureaucracies, all the kind of meetings to try to just get people to be on your side. I think it has a lot to do with negotiation. It has a lot to do with just diplomacy. But yeah, I have no idea. And I'd rather be into politics, but at the same time, I think there's a lot of psychology there that anyone could use, just understanding the dynamics at play.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Anytime. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Eating at a Meeting podcast, where every meal matters. I'm Tracy Stuckrath, your food and beverage inclusion expert. Call me and let's get started right now on creating safe and inclusive food and beverage experiences for your customers, your employees, and your communities. Share the podcast with your friends and colleagues at our Eating at a Meeting Facebook page and on all podcast platforms. To learn more about me and receive valuable information, go to tracystuckrath.com. And if you'd like more information on how to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line, then visit eatingatameeting.com.